Okay, I have gone ahead and set up an environment in Visual Studio to get us started on this, and I've started to write some code in. You have your typical pound includes up here and using namespace standard if you're using that. I know some of you might not be using that, but we're going to set it up that way. The other thing that we're going to do here, and you can just ignore this stuff for right now because I was just playing around trying to get stuff set up before class. But one thing you didn't see me do was I copied over my class diagram. If I ask you to put your class diagram, and I probably will, into your code, I don't actually mean write it into your code. What I mean is comment it into your program. This is how you would do this. So the name of the class is circle. I have my instance fields, and then I use separators between the different fields. Now remember, the constructors are typically not included in your class diagram, but I like them here just so you guys can see them. And also, you don't usually in the class diagram have the titles. So this is what a class diagram would look like. Again, notice the minus signs and the plus signs. There are some advantages to copying over your class diagram, and we'll talk about them here in a minute. Okay? All right, so here we go. First of all, you guys have been creating driver programs, and that's what main is right here. And so up to this point, I haven't had you like separate things out, except that we did start to learn how to write different methods and different functions. We are going to learn or talk about today is how you can actually write an entire object and then create and use that object within your driver. And for today and for the class that you guys are going to do, we are going to create the class outside of main, and I am going to put it above main for right now. Okay? So for example, we are creating a circle. So what's the name of the class? It's a circle. So I use the reserved word class and I do circle, if I could type, followed by a parens. Okay? No, I lied. No parens yet. Then I have a left curly brace. Please notice, because this is where a huge error often happens. And it's about the only time, there might be one other time that you put a semicolon outside a curly brace. But do you notice a semicolon that it put in right there? Don't forget the semicolon, okay? Because that's going to cause mistakes. You have to have the end of the semicolon there because this is its own little object that you're working with. Now, what instance fields? Are they private or public? Instance fields should be what? They should be private. So we could use the reserved word private followed by a colon, and then I define all of my instance fields. Double. And then in C++, as some other languages, I'm going to use a different naming convention, and that is I'm going to use an underscore on my instance fields. The reason that I do that is it tells me then that that is an instance field value whenever I use it in my program. So it's kind of like using the this operator in Java. Now, some programmers will take all of your instance fields and leave them or move them to the bottom of the class. I'm going to leave it at the top of the class. Immediately following that are going to be all of my constructors and my methods. So my circle has to have a constructor named the same thing, and that's my default constructor. And in my default constructor, I'm going to say that the radius is 1. And what that means is if I don't tell the computer otherwise, the radius on the circle is going to be 1. But most of the time, I need to tell the computer what radius I am going to use, so I need a second constructor, which is going to bring in a value for the radius. On the second constructor, I am then going to assign underscore radius to, let me reverse that. I'm going to assign radius to underscore radius. This is an example of where it's kind of nice to name your instance field a little bit differently so that you don't have exactly the same variable name here, okay? So I'm bringing in a parameter, radius, and it's going to be assigned to my instance field radius in that case, okay? You may or may not, on your guys' classes, you don't necessarily have to do both a default and a parameterized constructor. The instructions in the textbook might lend you to do just one or the other. You don't have to have two constructors. That's just an FYI. Okay? It's not a bad idea. Okay? But when you're first creating your classes, you might not need to. The other thing, and actually if I go back down and I take a look at my methods in my class diagram, I have 3 methods. And what's kind of nice, if you guys actually design your class diagram well, I'm going to copy those three methods. I'm going to come up here to my class and I'm going to paste. What did the plus sign mean? It was public. Now, we know that they're public because they're all underneath the public right here. So that's a little bit different than in Java. You'd have to write that word in. And now I have these are basically your function prototypes is what they are, okay? And so when you are creating a class, you're writing all of the methods, and these are your function prototypes that are in your class diagram. Well, I need to get rid of the semicolons because that's going to be a mistake if I leave them at the end of that parentheses. And then I do my beginning and ending block for each one of these. I strongly encourage that you go ahead and set up your beginning and ending blocks so then you guys don't, forget that. All right? Okay, how do I set a radius? Now, on this one, I'm bringing in just a single variable r. If it's setting the radius, that's actually going to set the instance field, and it's going to set it to the value r. So I'm going to send in a parameter, whatever that parameter is, I'm going to assign it to the instance field. Getters, you guys are probably familiar with. What does a getter do? It returns a value. It's just like with your functions. So if I want to return, what do I want to return? The radius, okay? All right. And then get area. This is one that's going to take a little bit of calculation. And there's a couple ways that you guys can set this up. If you are a beginning programmer, a lot of times you will create a helper variable. And I encourage you to do this because it helps with your thought formation a little bit. So I'm going to create a variable for area. And then my area is going to be 3.14, that's pi, times radius squared. I didn't point it out, but earlier I included cmath. And so I'm going to use a built-in math function, which is just pow. I could use a constant for pi. You are absolutely correct. It would be the best to use a constant for pi. Yes. But I'm not right now. So you guys can make your program better when you do yours. Okay? So when I go to use the power function, just so you can understand how this works, I'm going to take the radius. And please notice I'm using the instance field radius. And I'm going to square it. So the power function takes a base raised to a power. And if you don't remember what all your math library functions are, the best thing that you guys can do then is just Google. You can go to c++.com, which is your kind of source for all things C++, and we could look up the math libraries. It's probably going to be quicker if I just do math library and do C++, and it might bring me to c++.com. There it is, c++.com, but it's going to take me right to the math reference. And so here's all my math methods. So if I scroll down, you've got your sine, cosine, a sine, a cosine. Those are your arc cosine. Those are your inverse sine and cosine functions. So if you ever have to do any inverse, that's what they're called here. You have exponential functions, logarithmic functions. Those of you doing Algebra 2 right now should know some logarithm and stuff. Here's the pow function. If I click on this, and another reason I'm showing you guys this is you should start to get familiar with running or using this environment, okay? And if I scroll down, right here is where it gives me some examples. So pow, 7, 3, that's 7 cubed, and then the output is down here. So you can look at the little code examples, and then you can look at the output. And it also tells you what version of C++ it's running on, okay? Everything that we do would be in C++ 98. There might be some fancier stuff in plus 11. We're not running all the fancy stuff. So anyway, don't be afraid to look that stuff up. So that should now take 3.14 times the radius squared. Now, what if I wanted to use the built-in constant? There is a built-in constant. Does anybody know how to use that? And actually, my brain is taking a break because I'm thinking Java right now. That's actually Java. Now I don't remember what it is. Is it just PI? I don't remember. You guys can figure that out. I'm not going to worry about it right now. All right. All right. And then what's the last thing that I do? What does this mean right here? This means that this method has to do what? It returns a value, so I have to return what? I have to return area, okay? Now, it's possible you guys could just do, well, you might want to spell return correctly. Yeah, go ahead. There was a question.
Why do you insert radius
Okay, so what's happening back here with set radius is that if I ever decide to change the radius of the circle, that's my access to that variable. Because that's your instance fields are private so that nobody can directly access them. The only way that you should be able to change an instance field is through a setter. Okay, and that's to protect your data so that nobody can get inside your program, so to speak, and corrupt the data. So set radius won't be used right away. We might not ever use it, but it's there in case I need to change that instance field. What other questions do you guys have? Okay, another way that I could write this method right here is I really could just say return and then do the calculation like this. Now, it'll yell at me if I just have that line right here because it's going to tell me that, well, maybe it won't. I thought it would tell me there was a conflict because we returned here and we to return here. So if you would prefer not to have that helper variable, you can just return the calculation if you'd like, okay? But many times when you're first starting to program, it's very helpful to put in a variable for what it represents and then return that. I don't care which method you guys use, but I do care about consistency. And I do care that you have things kind of nice, neat, organized, and spaced out, etc. Use your white space appropriately. All right, I think we've got it. Now I called this get area, so I'm going to have to remember that I called that. I'm going to clean up my white space, but we just wrote a class, okay? So your class is defined as a circle. It has a radius, and it has two constructors. It has a setter. It has a getter for the instance fields, and I have this mutator method that's going to, or a worker method, sometimes it's called a worker method, that's going to return an area. Now I need to create, and I need to create my driver. I need to create objects. I need to call those things in the class in order to get this to work. A couple other things that I should do before I run the program is I should create some test data, okay? So for example, if my radius is 1, what will my area be? Should be 3.14. If my radius is 2, I have no idea. Somebody want to calculate it? Is it going to be, well, it would be 2 squared is 4. 4 times 3.14. Anybody got a calculator handy? 4 times 3.14. Are you on it for me? Anybody got it? 4 times 3.14 is 12.56. So in the notes, when I say I want you to create some test data, I want you to create some test data before you write your code. Okay? All right, so here's the deal. How do you then declare and work with an object? You do this just like it's a data type. So I'm going to declare a circle, and I'm going to have circle 1, and I'm going to have circle 2. Nothing like too fancy here. Those two circles use the default constructor. So what is their radius? Their radiuses will be set to 1. If I create another circle, I'm going to say circle 3, and I'm going to send it a value, 34.2. So now what's the radius on circle 3? It's 34.2. If I were to output, and that's what I started to write my output. So the area for a circle with radius, and I'm going to say circle 1 dot. And here's how you guys know you did this correctly. If you hit that dot operator and these methods show up, you know you set up something correctly. If they don't show up, something is wrong with your class, okay? And I want to get the radius. So I'm going to say the area for a circle with radius, circle1.getRadius. It's a method, so it's going to need parens. And then I haven't finished writing this. And another thing that you guys can do, like with your code, you can hit enter there, and as long as you keep the less than, that separator there, you can kind of wrap your code around. And then I want to get the area. So it's circle 1, and how do I get the area? Get area. And if I hit the tab key, that fills that in for me. And I probably want to do an end L at the end of that. If I run this, I'm going to cross my fingers that it actually executes. If I run this, hopefully I will get the area for circle 1, which should be 3.14 because we created that test data just a little bit ago. All right, now I don't actually know if it's running anywhere. Let me see if I can find the screen. Is it still building? Do I have any errors? Okay, we just hit the execute button and it took a really long time, but we did get the output to be that the radius of 1 is 3.14. Okay? All right, so you can use that model where you guys are kind of echoing down here. And then I'm just going to actually copy this line of code, and we're going to get some output for our other circles that we created. And if we ran this right now, circle 1 and circle 2 should be identical. Circle 3 would be whatever 34.2 squared times pi is. But what I want to demonstrate here is how do you actually use those setters. So for example, I could take circle 2 dot set radius. And again, this is an indicator that you did something correctly here if the set radius comes up after you hit the dot operator. And so if I change the radius on circle 2, I'm using that method. I could change some other radii, but I'm not going to. We're going to just see if we can get the results to print out. It took a really long time a minute ago, but I'm going to cross my fingers that it won't take as long this time. So I need to stop executing. And we're going to see if we get the output. Now what I probably should do, though, is I probably should use, what radius did I use on my test data? Oh, I did use, so I should get the 12.56. Somebody got their calculator quick? What was my third radius that I used? 34.2. What is the area if I have a radius of 34.2? Somebody type that in while we go ahead and hit execute. And go ahead and tell me what it is out loud. 3,672 should be our output roughly. And there we go. So I've got, I have a slight problem. Can you guys tell me what my problem is? Yeah. My dot get radius, I need to change to circle 2 and then circle 3. So that's a danger in cutting and pasting sometimes. So I quit executing and I run my code again. And we should get the correct responses this time. We got the correct areas, but it just didn't print for the correct radius. Okay? And so cross my fingers that it runs. And there's our output. Okay? Now, you guys will need to create your own program, design a class, and a driver in order to test your code. Your driver should test all the methods. Did we test all of our methods? Did we test the default constructor? Yes. Did we test the parameterized constructor? Yes. Did we test set radius? Yes. Get radius? Yes. And get area. So in your driver, make sure that you're writing code that tests all the methods that you guys wrote for your assignments. Okay? So the next few days, what you guys are going to be doing is creating your own class diagram for one of the classes that you pick at the end of the chapter, and then creating your own class. Do you get to write the class immediately? No. What do you do first? Yeah. Do the class diagram, do your test data, and then you get released in order to write your class. All right. That ends today's lecture. Please turn to your books and try to choose one of your programs before you leave class today.